A rise in authoritarianism has led to war. Luckily, that friend of democracy, Justin Trudeau, is here to help save us from a slippage. Hello there, you 5.1 million awakening wonders. This is what it feels like to be part of a conversation, to be heard, to be seen, to know that you can exclude and ignore certain information, to know that you don't always have to be right, that together we can create new narratives, new stories, and new understanding. In a minute, we're going to be talking about Justin Trudeau, your friend and mine, who says that the rise of authoritarianism has led to a slippage in democratic values. He says this without any hint of irony after the authoritarianism in Canada used against truckers, protesters, bank accounts, fundraising sites. It's unbelievable. If you're in the UK or if you're not and you fancy a trip here, I'm on tour at the moment in places like Scarborough, Sheffield, Hull, Liverpool. I'm all over the gaff, Plymouth, Bristol. It's funny as hell, but it's a lot more than that. Meditation, breathwork, weird stuff's going down. I want you to be a part of it. If you want to come, there's a link in the description. Now let's see what Justin Trudeau's been saying and doing, because I know that dude was a darling of the liberal left, wasn't he, for a while? He looked good, he talks nice. But how do we look at him now?
We've come to a moment that, quite frankly, we've seen coming over the past years. And we've talked about it in the news, not just about Ukraine, but about democracies around the world.
He's saying about a lot, isn't he? It's really appealing to that Canadian stereotype right there.
We've talked about it in not just about Ukraine, but about democracies around the world.
What I feel is that Justin Trudeau lost his authority to comment on issues like this when he treated the truckers in the manner that he did, when they introduced emergency powers and then did not revoke them, that gave them the ability to freeze people's bank accounts. That is an assault on democracy. There's no question that Russia's actions in Ukraine are deplorable, but what right do you have to offer that critique when you are no real friend of democracy when it don't suit you?
We see a bit of a slippage. A bit of a slippage in our democracies.
You want to watch your own slippages, mate?
Countries turning towards slightly more authoritarian leaders.
Yeah, I feel like I saw a bit of authoritarianism in Canada when truckers had pepper spray used against them, when bank accounts were frozen, when GoFundMe sites were shut down. That's different. When other people do authoritarianism, they do it with a funny accent, and it's about time we stopped it.
Countries allowing increasing misinformation and disinformation to be shared on social media.
What about at the beginning of the trucker protests when he outright said they're racists, they're misogynists? Is that not misinformation?
Turning people against the values and the principles of democracies that are so strong.
Oh, unless it's inconvenient, then they're meaningless. Because if the values and principles of a democracy are strong, what that means is when it don't suit you, those values and principles are still there. Oh no, people are protesting, they don't agree with us, they don't agree with mandates, but because we've got these values and principles, we're going to just have to allow them to do that. Not just change our values and principles and shut this down and just call them things that would facilitate shutting them down. If they're racist and misogynist, we can shut them down, because we all know that racism and misogyny are wrong.
And that slippage.
Slippage isn't such a good word. You want to use it multiple times. If you invent a word and that word sounds a bit dirty and it's something that might happen by mistake in intercourse, don't use it again and again when you're trying to present yourself on the international stage as a diplomat. The problem here about this, you could be heading for the cleft of democracy, but a slippage could end you up a pipe of disaster.
Over the years, unfortunately emboldened Putin. And made him think that he could get away with this, that he could get away with it in Ukraine.
And let's not mention that there's no discussion of the complex set of interests that were at play in Ukraine in the build-up, most notably that came to a head in 2014. We've done a video on that, have a look. It's complicated. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said he's seen a slippage in democratic values across the world, which has emboldened Russian President Vladimir Putin to think he could invade Ukraine without impunity. Of all the ridiculous analysis I've witnessed since the start of this, I think the stupidest is a slippage has emboldened Putin. You know what's happened? What? Go on, you're Prime Minister of somewhere. Tell us. Well, there's been a slippage, and the slippage has emboldened Putin. It's emboldened him to Ukraine. He'd said a foreseen slippage. He really rates this word slippage, doesn't he? He said a foreseen slippage in countries adhering to their democratic principles made Mr. Putin think he could get away with it in Ukraine. What he's trying to say is he's trying to underwrite an aggressive response. That's what that is. Oh, we weren't democratic enough. What do you mean democratic enough? Didn't militarise all sorts of zones, didn't arm and weaponise potential allies in that region. region, aren't imposing hard enough sanctions, aren't acting like we have the moral authority to shut down Putin, which, that's for you and I and all of us to calculate and judge and decide. And God knows there's a baffling array of intersecting vectors to consider there. And I would say too complex to be put down to a slippage. During a press conference about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau claimed that it's a moment to stand against disinformation, misinformation, propaganda, and vowed to continue working with other nations to fight disinformation. Trudeau is conflating misinformation and disinformation, which are subjective ideas, with Putin's actions, which are obviously bad. Therefore saying, we have to stamp out misinformation and disinformation or else it might lead to more Putins. Is there nothing they won't do? Is there no misuse of logic they won't apply in order to pursue their own agenda? You know what's led to Putin? Go on, what? Joe Rogan. What? By slippage. We're shutting your bank account down. He also praised countries around the world, saying, no, this is a moment to stand for democracy against disinformation, misinformation and propaganda. If ever there was a moment to stand up for democracy, it's when you're the leader of a country and there's protests that you may not agree with, to create an opportunity for discourse and conversation, to listen to people that you disagree with and see where you might be right and they might be right and where both of you could be wrong, and where together in the crucible of public discourse and democracy, the very thing that you claim to stand and fly flags for, you can create systems that are reflective of the varying requirements of a diverse population. All things that when it suits them, they say they support, and when it comes to crunch time, they shut down and pepper spray into oblivion. And to stay true to these values that have led to respect and prosperity around the world that we continue to need to fight for. That sounds to me like someone that's been schooled by the WEF. That sounds like someone that knows how to say stuff, that speaks one language and acts in an entirely different one. Before the invasion of Ukraine, Trudeau's government threatened to regulate social media companies if they don't censor misinformation. If you don't start doing what we want you to do, we are going to regulate you. This is what we hear again and again, applied to cryptocurrencies, social media, all the emergent technologies that present opportunity for ordinary people to trade or communicate in ways that are previously unregulated, are now being controlled, so that the information is controlled, so that the flow of money is controlled, so that the economic aspect is controlled, all in the name of what? A democracy that shows that in the moment when it would be most apposite to be democratic, folds up into authoritarianism. And once again, in the name of protecting, we've got to protect you. We've got to protect you from cryptocurrencies. We've got to protect you from disinformation. We've got to protect you from freedom. Trudeau had also previously supported limits to free speech before backtracking on his remarks after criticism. Additionally, he's claimed that freedom of expression isn't freedom to hate. Yeah, let's not go around hating, but it's pretty clear that language in the wrong mouths is a tool for censorship and control. Last month, Trudeau invoked emergency powers in a push to quash protests over COVID-19 restrictions. Under Mr. Trudeau's decree, police had the authority to push back crowds on foot or with horses, use pepper spray, enter trucks and other vehicles by whatever means necessary, and make arrests en masse. Now, whatever that is, it ain't open democracy. No one voted for it. No one said they wanted it. It was a legal protest against mandates that the protesters didn't agree with. And if you don't agree with them, it is yet more beholden upon you to hear their voices. If what underwrites your moral high ground are the principles of democracy, you better be sure that you live by them. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association stated, the federal government has not met the threshold necessary to invoke the Emergencies Act. That's a democratic body saying that what he did was undemocratic. This law creates a high and clear standard for a good reason. Yeah, to prevent tyranny and undemocratic action. The Act allows government to bypass ordinary democratic processes. This standard has not been met. That means it's categorically undemocratic. The crushing of those protests was not done democratically. The Emergencies Act can only be invoked when a situation seriously threatens the ability of the Government of Canada to preserve the sovereignty, security and territorial integrity of Canada, and when the situation cannot be effectively dealt with under any other law of Canada. Obviously, the war in Ukraine and the crushing of protests in Canada are two separate things. This war is a humanitarian disaster. It is wrong. What I'm saying is that if the reason that this war is wrong, or one of the reasons, is because it is against democratic principles, then you must ensure that where it is possible, where there is no militarized state opposing your ability to be democratic, you should be democratic. Otherwise, you do not have the same argument. You can criticize Russia for many, many reasons. You can condemn the actions of Russia, quite rightly, for many reasons. What you can't do is claim to be an exemplar of democracy if whenever you get the opportunity to be tyrannical, you take it. Let's see what Justin Trudeau had to say about Chinese state authoritarianism in 2014.
He was asked which country he most admired and referred to China.
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China.
Even then, before Justin Trudeau became a sort of figure of loathing as a result of the trucker actions, and I'm sure for other things that I've not been following, he literally, while he's still in his boy band phase, is openly declaring affection for Chinese state authoritarianism.
Because their basic dictatorship is allowing them to actually turn their economy around on a dime and say, we need to go green as fast as we need to start, investing in solar.
If only we had a dictatorship. Don't worry, Justin. Future you has got that covered. So, obviously, we're not conflating the horrific actions in Ukraine with the merely deplorable actions in Canada. That situation is a lot worse. No one would make any contrary claim. Certainly I wouldn't. But a criticism of the morals and values of our leaders is available because of the way that our own countries are governed and the way that they behave in crisis. I'm sure you would agree that's a valid point. Wouldn't it be better if we lived in systems that were reflective of the values that are espoused when it's convenient to espouse them? That's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments below. What do you think about Trudeau? You've been tracking this story? Give this video a like. If you're not already a subscriber, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us when you're a subscriber. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at this one or this one. And if you're in the UK or fancy a trip here, because it's possible now, come see me live. Carlisle, Blackpool, Hull. There's a link in the description. Stay free.